For 37 years, Yosef Walaszczyk told no one what he'd done in 1942. Not his wife, not his children. He had lived through the Nazi occupation of Poland, forged papers, bribed Gestapo officers, and hidden 50 Jews in apartments he controlled. But after the war, he locked it all away, as if silence was safer than memory. It wasn't until the early 1980s, sitting before a young historian in Warsaw, that the truth began to slip out. But why did a man who saved so many feel he had to disappear into normal life? And what finally made him speak? June 20th, 2022, Warsaw. The morning papers carried a quiet obituary. Yosef Walaszczyk, age 102, had died. Few recognized the name, but hidden behind those letters was the last of Poland's righteous among the nations, the man sometimes called the Polish Schindler. For 37 years after the war, he had lived like a shadow among the living, carrying the weight of 50 lives he had saved without ever speaking a word of it. Only near the end did he allow his story to surface, not as a confession, but as a duty. He was born on November 13, 1919, in Częstochowa, a small industrial city in southern Poland. When the Germans invaded in 1939, Yosef was 20. He worked as a leather worker, quiet, disciplined, and clever enough to adapt. When Warsaw fell, he was sent to manage a grain estate under German supervision. It gave him rare mobility and access to permits, tools that would later save lives. But in those years, no one imagined what survival would demand. In 1941, he checked into a hotel in Warsaw with his girlfriend, Irene. She was Jewish, hiding under false papers. That morning, Gestapo officers burst through the door, sweeping the halls. Yosef's heart stopped. If they found her, both would die. He acted fast. He distracted them, offered his room for inspection, joked in German, kept their attention just long enough for Irene to slip away. Later, he bribed officers with gold and vodka, forged identity cards, and smuggled food into the Warsaw ghetto. He built a network of hiding places. In one apartment, 13 Jews lived under his care, their names unknown even to each other. Once, a tip-off nearly exposed them. Yosef was arrested and lined up for execution. But he managed to talk his way out. Some say through sheer luck, others through his calm, fluent German. He walked away and went straight back to helping. When the war ended, Poland was silent. The rescuers were not celebrated. Talking about helping Jews could bring suspicion from the new communist government. Yosef returned to work, rebuilt his life, married, raised a family. To his neighbors, he was just a businessman. To the people he'd saved, he was a ghost who had vanished. Decades later, letters began arriving. Survivors he had once hidden had tracked him down. They wrote from Israel, the United States, France. Their memories pulled him out of anonymity. In 2002, Yad Vashem, the biggest World Holocaust Remembrance Center organization, recognized him as righteous among the nations. At the ceremony, he spoke softly, almost reluctantly, as if words were still dangerous. When Yosef broke his silence, others followed. His voice cracked open the quiet decades that had sealed so many stories away, and soon another survivor, silent for even longer, would find her own moment to speak. March 7th, 2019, London. A frail woman in her 90s lifts a blue folder marked Republic of Austria. Eva Schloss smiles, but her hands shake. She has just reclaimed the citizenship that was taken from her 81 years earlier. The ceremony is quiet, almost understated. Yet behind her calm face lives a lifetime of silence. For decades, she never spoke about what happened in Auschwitz.
Of Anne Frank will be in Nashville later this week. What an opportunity this is. News Channel 5's Kristen Scovere said.
It wasn't fear that held her back. It was grief. Eva was born in Vienna on October 24, 1929. Her father, Erich Gehringer, was a businessman, and her mother, Fritzi, kept a warm, book-filled home. But after the Nazi annexation of Austria in 1938, everything changed overnight. Jewish shops were smashed, neighbors vanished. Her father decided they had to leave. The Geringer family fled first to Belgium, then to Amsterdam, hoping to stay ahead of the growing shadow. In Amsterdam, they lived on the same street as another Jewish family, the Franks. Eva was about the same age as Anne Frank. The two girls became friends, riding bicycles through the canals, sharing childish secrets. Neither could imagine that one day their fates would mirror each other so closely. In May 1940, German troops invaded the Netherlands. The noose tightened. Jews were banned from parks, cinemas, and schools. By 1942, deportations began. The Franks went into hiding. The Geringers tried to disappear too, moving from one safe apartment to another. But in May 1944, the Gestapo caught them. Eva was just 15. They were sent first to Westerbork, then to Auschwitz-Birkenau. At the camp gate, the family was separated. Her father and brother were sent to the men's camp. Eva and her mother to the women's. She remembered the stench of burning, the endless roll calls, the hunger that gnawed like an animal. Somehow, she survived. Her father and brother did not. When the war ended, Eva and her mother returned to Amsterdam. Otto Frank, Anne's father, had also survived. In 1953, Otto married Eva's mother Fritzi, making Eva and Anne stepsisters, though Anne was already gone. The diary that Anne left behind became famous, read across the world, while Eva remained silent. She focused on building a life in London, raising a family, and keeping her memories locked away. It took nearly 40 years for her to speak. In the 1980s, she began visiting schools, telling children what she had seen. She co-founded the Anne Frank Trust in the UK and turned her silence into a mission to fight hatred. When she held that Austrian passport again in 2019, she said, "They took everything, but not my voice." But others took far longer to find theirs. Some survivors stayed silent for half a century before a single photograph broke their silence forever. Summer 2024. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is quiet except for the low hum of anticipation. Irene Fogel-Weiss, now in her early 90s, sits on the stage holding a photograph she has avoided for 80 years. Her hands tremble slightly, not from age alone, but from the memories it contains. It is a portrait of herself as a child, taken in Auschwitz, part of the inventory kept by the Nazis. A young girl with wide, frightened eyes, standing among strangers whose fate she almost shared. Irene was born on November 21, 1930, in Botraji, then part of Czechoslovakia, now in Ukraine. She was one of 6 children in a family that prized education and art. Her father, a photographer, documented family events with care, unaware that years later, some of his images would be twisted into Nazi records of deported Jews. In 1944, when Irene was just 13, the family was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The journey itself was nightmarish. Overcrowded cattle cars, thirst, starvation, and the constant fear of death at every stop. At Auschwitz, she was tattooed a 6236 and assigned to the Canada warehouses, where young women were forced to sort through the belongings of Jews who had been murdered in the gas chambers. Every day, she handled the possessions of people she would never meet, and each object whispered the horror of lives erased. Later, she endured the death marches that swept prisoners toward Germany as the Allies advanced, and she was sent to Ravensbrück, then Neustadt, Glühwein. By the end of the war, several of her siblings had died, and those who survived carried the weight of loss in silence. After liberation, Irene emigrated to New York in 1947. In 1949, she married and became a teacher, dedicating herself to family and community while keeping the past locked inside. For decades, she refused to speak about her experiences in public, and photographs of her younger self remained tucked away. unseen and unexamined. It was only years later, when she participated in exhibitions and first-person sessions at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, that she encountered the photograph again. Her own image, captured by the Nazis, confronted her with the girl she had been and the horrors she had endured. She froze, and for a moment the decades of silence returned with full force. Then she began to speak, slowly, carefully, allowing her story to emerge through the lens of memory, testimony, and the evidence the world had preserved. Memory can return, even when it's locked away. But what of Roman Kent, whose promise to others would echo in ways Irene could never have imagined? May 2021, New York City. The funeral was quiet, almost unbearably so. No hymns played, no organ filled the air. Only a recording of Roman Kent's voice drifted over the small gathering, soft and steady, repeating words he had carried for more than 70 years. "If I survive, I will tell the world what happened to you." He was speaking to Lala, his small dog, taken by German officers in 1940 when his family was forced into the Łódź ghetto. Lala had been more than a pet. She had been Roman's companion, a small presence that offered comfort when the ghetto's walls closed in. The promise haunted him as much as the memories of hunger, beatings, and death. Roman Kent was born April 18, 1929, in Łódź, Poland. When the Germans occupied the city in 1939, he was just 10. By 1940, the Kent family was crammed into the Łódź ghetto. Starvation, disease, and the cruelty of guards defined every day. Lala followed Roman everywhere, nuzzling his hands when he sat shivering in their tiny room, offering warmth, protection, and a reminder of a world beyond the barbed wire. For a boy whose childhood had been stolen, Lala became a lifeline, a connection to something familiar and loving in a city turned hostile. In 1944, Roman and his family were deported to Auschwitz. He was 14. Lala had been seized long before, yet the memory of her small body pressed against his legs, the sound of her little paws, never left him. At the camp, Roman endured forced labor, beatings, and the constant terror of selections. He was later moved to Mürzwiller and Flossenburg, barely surviving. Most of his family perished. After the war, Roman emigrated to the United States in 1946. He rebuilt his life, established a business, and raised a family. For decades, he said nothing about Auschwitz or Lala. Silence became a shield. It was only in the 1980s, when his daughter asked why they had no grandparents, that the promise resurfaced. Roman began sharing his story, first with her, then with the world. He later chronicled his experiences story through various mediums, including the children's book My Dog Lala and a virtual reality film titled Lala, produced by the USC Shoah Foundation. Roman Kent died May 21, 2021, at 92. His silence ended not only in words, but in remembrance, leadership, and a promise kept. But some survivors broke their silence in ways no one expected. Intimate, striking. Poland, 2005. In the ruins of a former concentration camp, archaeologists brush away decades of dirt. Their hands stop on a corroded metal bracelet. Etched into it is a name: Benek Feiner. It is small, almost fragile, yet it carries decades of silence. The man who wore it had survived 6 Nazi camps, but for 60 years, he had not told a soul. Ben Feiner was born in 1927 in Bytom, Poland. When he was 12, the Nazis deported him to Buchenwald. Over the next 5 years, he endured the horrors of Flossenburg and 4 other camps, forced to perform brutal labor. He watched prisoners die from starvation and disease. He was beaten for minor infractions, sometimes for stealing a scrap of bread to survive. Each day was a test of will, a lesson in fear and endurance. Liberation came in 1945 at the hands of American soldiers. Ben moved first to England, then to the United States. He rebuilt a life, founded a business, married, and raised a family. But the story of those years, the endless nights of work, the friends lost, the brutality, remained locked in his mind. He spoke to no one, not even close family. The bracelet, which he had worn through it all, was tucked away in a drawer, a quiet companion to memory. It was only in the early 2000s, after the bracelet surfaced in a dig, that the memories Ben had buried came rushing back. The small object acted as a key, unlocking decades of silence. He began giving interviews, speaking at schools, and recounting the reality of camp life with detail and clarity. He published his memoir, Silent for 60 Years, sharing the life of a boy forced to survive unimaginable horror, and the decades of quiet that followed. Ben Feiner died in 2016, aged 89. His story, once silent and hidden, became a testament to the endurance of memory and the power of a single object to reignite a lifetime of recollection. But while Ben's story began with a bracelet, the next survivor's story began with movement, a journey across continents, and a voice that would travel to millions through modern screens, connecting past and present in a way the Holocaust's earliest witnesses could never have imagined. London, July 2020. A small room, quiet except for the hum of a smartphone recording. Lily Ebert, 96 years old, leans toward the lens. "My name is Lily Ebert. I survived Auschwitz." Her voice is steady, but every word carries decades of memory. Within hours, the clip spreads across continents. Millions of eyes watch, some in disbelief, some in tears. This is the voice of a survivor who once held her story close, now amplified by the technology she never imagined. Born December 29, 1923, in Bonyhad, Hungary, Lily grew up in a modest Jewish family. Life shifted violently in 1944 when German troops invaded Hungary. She, her mother, and her siblings were rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. On arrival, her mother and youngest siblings were murdered immediately. Lily was tattooed with the number A13909 and assigned to forced labor, working under constant threat, hunger, and exhaustion. Every day, survival demanded cunning, courage, and a quiet heart. After liberation, Lily moved first to Israel, then London, seeking a life rebuilt from the fragments of loss. For decades, she spoke little of her experiences, keeping the horrors tucked away. Her focus was family, community, and creating a safe life, far from the camps that had shaped her youth. Her story existed in whispers, shared only in private, never public. In the 1990s, she began testifying to school children in London, offering fragments of memory as lessons. But it was her great-grandson, Dov Foreman, who recognized the reach of modern platforms. Together, they began recording brief clips, posting them on TikTok, combining history with immediacy. Lily's words, once silent, now traveled farther than any witness could have imagined. Millions interacted, commented, and learned from her first-hand account. She became not just a survivor, but a bridge between generations, a living archive. Lily Ebert passed away April 4, 2024, at the age of 100. Her life spanned a century of turmoil and renewal, her voice the thread connecting past and present. From barbed wire to broadband, her testimony traveled farther than anyone's before. But even as her story inspired millions, other survivors still carried silence deep within. One woman would find the courage to walk back into her own past, returning to the very fields where humanity's darkest chapter had once swallowed her whole. The morning was crisp in Krakow, April 12, 1998. Pola stepped off a bus into the shadow of Auschwitz-Birkenau for the first time in over 50 years. Around her, a group of teenagers shuffled, cameras in hand, whispers brushing against the barbed wire fences. Pola's hands trembled slightly, gripping the strap of her bag as if holding herself together against the tide of memory. The air smelled faintly of earth and metal, and every step forward was a step into a past she had locked away for decades. Born in 1930 in Krakow, Pola grew up in a Jewish household that was vibrant and full of life. Her childhood ended abruptly in 1943 when German forces deported her and her family to Auschwitz. At 13, she was separated from most of her relatives. Only a handful survived. The camps were a daily test of survival: forced labor, starvation, and the constant specter of death. Pola's body endured the marches, the barracks, and the relentless cold, while her mind tried to hold on to fragments of family and home. After liberation, she moved to Israel, seeking refuge and rebuilding. She married, had children, and immersed herself in the tasks of ordinary life, burying the memories of suffering deep inside. For 50 years, Pola's past remained silent, unspoken even to her own family. She avoided the questions, the photographs, the reminders. Auschwitz was a closed chapter, written in invisible ink across her mind. In 1998, her silence fractured. Invited to participate in the March of the Living, Pola returned to the land where innocence had been stolen. Filmmakers captured every moment of the pilgrimage for the documentary Pola's March. Standing before the infamous gate, she trembled, her voice breaking as she recounted the horrors she had long buried. Her story, once sealed, flowed openly now. Memories of lost siblings, the whispers of survival, the faces that haunted her dreams. Students leaned in, listening, some with tears in their eyes. Pola Suswine died in 2005 at age 75, leaving behind a testimony that would continue to echo through classrooms and films. She showed that silence can endure for decades, but eventually even the heaviest memories demand release. For decades, Holocaust survivors stayed silent, haunted by fear, loss, and memories too heavy to share. Some hid their stories in daily routines, others in journals, photographs, or tattoos. When they finally spoke, it wasn't just for themselves. It was for the children who never knew, for the world that almost forgot, for history that demands witness. Silence can protect a life, but truth can protect a future. Nazism is gone, but its shadow is not. Authoritarianism is rising, freedoms are shrinking, and cruelty can awaken again. Their voices may be gone, but their warnings remain. It's our turn to speak, to witness, and to stop history from repeating.